One of the main cultural differences between the West and India, or Asia as a whole, is individualism versus collectivism. To define individualism, it is a personality trait that is possessed by people who believe that they do not need to normalize themselves with other people, and therefore do not go by traditions, but rather wish to create their own dent in the world, and they will utilize all possible means to do so. It is the habit or principle of being independent and self-reliant. Individualistic cultures are those cultures that stress the needs of the individual over the needs of the group as a whole. In this type of culture, people are seen as independent and autonomous. Social behavior tends to be dictated by the attitudes and preferences of individuals.
Cultures in North America and Western Europe tend to be individualistic. In such cultures, being dependent upon others is often considered shameful or embarrassing. Collectivist cultures, on the other hand, emphasize the needs and goals of the group as a whole, over the needs and desires of each individual. In such cultures, relationships with other members of the group and the interconnectedness between people play a central role in each person's identity. Cultures in Asia, Africa, tend to be more collectivistic.
In the past, people in India, and Asia as a whole, used to live with their parents for a long time, before moving out, although recently, it has become more of a trend to live away from our parents, because of work and college. But in the past, living away from parents was not in the trend. Nuclear families were rarely heard of, and was looked upon with malice, portraying betrayal towards one's family and parents, who had spent their lives nurturing their kids. Even today, in most other Asian countries, adults still live with their parents for a long time. In the West, though, it is the parents that feel that their children need to have a separate space for themselves, and thus need to move out. You would observe very few adults that still live together with their parents.
Do you think that the adults there have less love for their parents than the adults here in Asia? Doubtful. Firstly, because love is not something that you can measure, and secondly, different people have different ways of expressing love. Love is not absolute and comparable from person to person. It is just a cultural value that has been imbibed into Asians for a long time, that staying together makes the bond stronger. The values we have imbibed for generations teach us to value friendships, love, religion, and marriage as divine, to sometimes sacrifice our own happiness to fulfill our duties towards our families. But does that mean that adults in the West don't feel responsible towards their families? Of course, they too feel responsible. They just don't outrightly express it as much as we do.
The parents in the West try and teach their kids to stand up for themselves. They teach them to be independent and allow them to experience most things in life, including extracurriculars, from a very young age, so that later in life, the kids are able to figure out what they would do with their lives. The parents in the Asian countries mostly teach their kids the pragmatic way of life, the skills that will help them earn a stable income, and life with which the next generations of families could sustain. However, today, parents in India are also trying to empower their kids through experimentation with different experiences. But in the earlier days, experimentation was very rare, and parents favored occupations that paid well and were revered in the society, mostly engineers, doctors, lawyers, etc.
Actors, musicians, sportsters and others were not considered professions at all. This was where the West differed from the East in that the individualistic and independent thinking allowed one to be one's true self, and this true self was always revered in the society, while in the East, most people had to hide their true selves, and had to instead look for other reflections, so that they could be accepted into and respected in the society. And because the parents were also collectivistic in their mindsets, they would pass on the same values down the generations.
You may have observed in most Western movies how rarely they would use the honorifics like sir, madam. Instead, they called their bosses by names. While in India and most of Asia, respecting one's senior and superior at work by using honorifics has always been a culture passed on from generations.